Hello, I'm Don Guthrie, and I'm glad to be a part of this video series, Stories from the Journey, Ministers and Mental Health. Appreciate the invitation from Ben Hanna and also the Pastor Strong Initiative and them making this project possible. After 32 years in the pastorate and 23 of them in San Antonio, I'm familiar with what Wayne Cordero calls the early warning signs. It's in chapter 4 of his book, Leading on Empty. I saw those early warning signs in myself, and the truth is I saw them in many others during my years in ministry. The umbrella term these days is depression. We use it a lot, but the author says, and I think he's exactly right, there really are a lot of smaller indications, just ingredient parts of a larger whole that often indicate something's going on inside of a pastor, and it's not unusual at all that it is happening. A sense of hopelessness is one that the author names. You just get to a point where you feel like you're going nowhere with your career, your life. There's no forward momentum. You're just sort of stuck, and you're not even sure why, but it's just a deep feeling. Indecisiveness, that was certainly one that I saw. It comes from a pastor making a decision, and then the outcomes of it are negative. Somebody's angry, or there's conflict that comes from that decision, and the result is you begin to be reluctant to make any decision at all, to lead. You just sort of get into a defensive posture, and that is a sense of indecisiveness sort of settles into your soul. The list is long. Irritability, anyone? A need to be alone that gets into the danger zone. You just what you used to love to be with people, and now all of a sudden you prefer to be alone. Eating disorders, pornography. It's a long list. Often, not always, but often. These are all rising up out of the same root. They are just signals that deep in the soul of the pastor, there is this depletion of energy, this level of stress, and he's begun to adjust. He's making some adjustments without even knowing that those adjustments themselves are going to have some negative impacts along the way. I appreciate Pastor Cordero mentioning the Elijah story in 1 Kings, encouraging us to remember that real faith does not mean that you're not going to ever be depressed. It doesn't mean that at all. As a matter of fact, so many times the struggles that go along with being a pastor lead you into that very real challenge. Remember the story? Elijah is weary. He's just so depleted. He's gone from Mount Carmel, this huge, very public victory. God has really come and vindicated his whole message and defeated his enemies. And then the next day or the days after that, Jezebel threatens him. And in that depleted state, he just collapses. He just doesn't have the energy to face that one. And so he runs. God meets him. Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord that he doesn't reject us when we just feel like we can't go on. And God meets him there and puts him on a program of nutrition and of rest and helps him wait on the Lord. That's what's really happening. Takes him to the mouth of a cave and says, now stand there, and brings these sensory experiences, these huge sensory experiences. Wind, fire, earthquake, all of them loud, public, that sort of echo what's gone on in Elijah's ministry for years. And then, once all that's over, that is finished, then something better, something dearer. The Bible calls it the still small voice, just this whispering truth that never goes away, never changes, never needs to compete for anybody's attention. And in that, Elijah is recalled. He hears again the voice of God. He puts his feet down on the eternal and feels ready again for ministry. 2007, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and woke up from that surgery with nobody giving me very many months to live, just medically. The interesting thing about that was a couple of years before that diagnosis, and by the way, that cancer had been long growing in my body. A couple of years before, I'd had a lot of anger issues that began showing up in members of my staff and some members of the church. So I went to see a counselor. Truth is, I didn't go to see one counselor. I went to one and I didn't really like him, and I went to another and she wasn't a fit. So you just kind of, as you know, not all counselors fit all people, and so you kind of have to keep the search going. Finally met this one man, and he and I just meshed. And over the next months, just this remarkable sense of help and healing and practical wisdom as I began to learn how to cope with this anger. Come to find out, then 2 years later, we knew what it was, that there really was a physical issue going on, and the manifestation was this anger. And so I had this larger perspective. And all those steps along that journey were necessary. I needed to both fix the emotion. That's what emotions often are. They're not the thing. They're indicators of the thing that has to be faced. Now, I'm not saying you need a counselor. I'm not saying you need to see a counselor. I am saying that depression is a cancer, and that inner depletion of life and the loss of courage to face it on just the way it comes at you, it will finally take your life in ways that you won't like. One of God's graces in your life is to help you face. And like Elijah, if you finally, he'll help you get enough strength gathered up together, and then to turn and call it what it is, hear his voice, and move on through it. Now, let me backtrack. Maybe you do need to see a counselor. It was brilliantly helpful for me. People say, weren't you embarrassed as a pastor to admit that you needed a counselor? And I said, well, I didn't think about it that way. I thought I just needed somebody to look at my life and give some sort of objective help to me. Maybe it's a friend. Sometimes it's just a friend with a little coaching. You have to coach that friend into confidentiality. Sometimes you have to coach him to say, now, please don't try to fix me. Just hear me. Sometimes just to verbalize the storm that's going on inside you is just so helpful. So talking to somebody. Many years while I was here in San Antonio, I would go away 2 or 3 times a year, and I would pray and think. I'm fairly contemplative in just my temperament. Quiet time matters a lot to me, but the truth is almost anybody, even the most gregarious among us, sometimes just time to get away from your life and look at it. So on those prayer retreats, I'd kneel for a while, I'd go run for a while, I'd journal for a while, I'd plan for a while, but I would always come back with some sense that I've at least triangulated my life. Here are all the problems I'm facing. Here is me, and here is this great God. And we were all at least at one table while we were talking about those things together. I would come back renewed and refreshed. Sometimes, like the Elijah story, it's just give some attention to your diet, give some attention to your time to rest, to be away from things. And I will say sometimes our ideas of recreation don't recreate us at all. Just to add a lot of other stuff or be away from the ministry is a lot of times not what you need at all. You need time to recreate, like Elijah. Hear again that voice that called you into ministry in the first place, and begin to say, okay, Father, let me recalibrate up against this new challenge. So here are my 3 takeaways from this book. I hope you'll read it. I hope you'll think. Number 1, depression is very common, very common. And there are a lot of early warning signs if you'll pay attention. Number 2, it is not evidence of spiritual failure, not even close. As a matter of fact, it may be an indicator that you are right where you're supposed to be. It's just the next challenge. And third, God is so faithful to help you face. It's another challenge that can be faced. It probably will be some of the deepest times you've ever had with Him. You may never have known His grace and His sweetness the way you will when you say, okay, Father, can I tell you how this feels? Can I just pray to you honest? King David prayers out in the desert when you just cried out to God to say, I need to tell you what it feels like to be me right now. 3 suggestions: talk to somebody, get away, purpose of finding some perspective and reflection, do honest prayer. You know, you don't have to be good at prayer. You just have to get there. There's no precise skill of knowing how to talk honestly to the Eternal One. Just usually it's much more about time and attention to seek His face, is what the Scripture says. And then third, take some attention to your exercise and your nutrition. I'll close with some questions. If somebody could see you right now, just an impartial observer, what words do you think he or she would use to describe you and your ministry at this moment? Joy, courage, progress, discouragement. Just take an assessment. Go on a walk. Take a lunch break and walk a park and say, what words would somebody use to describe me right now? Number 2, do you see any of the warning signs that Wayne Cordero lists? Just honest with yourself. Do I see some of those things showing up in my life? And then 3, write out what are the Elijah steps that you could take that help you get forward in the midst of this. You don't have to do this exactly right, but what you don't want to do is just continue an avoidant pattern where you just say, I'll feel better tomorrow, I'll feel better tomorrow. You just keep avoiding those issues rather than turning to face it and find the grace of God to do that the way you can. It's not a failure to have these challenges. It probably will end up being a failure that you will be sorry that you didn't find the grace of God to a counselor or a friend or the scriptures that you need, the new skills to turn and get a hold of these things. In 2 Corinthians 1, Paul described himself as despairing even of life. You know, I don't know what all the circumstances were that were eating away his energy. I suppose I'll never know all the things that beat on that dear man and just drained him, all the enemies and critics and things that just never went his way. But if he can say, I just got to the point where I just didn't know if I had the energy to go on one more day, then I don't think it should surprise us that we would also face that. And just like Elijah and Paul and our Lord in Gethsemane, where he was just having to man up underneath those stresses, the Lord knows how to do this with you, and He will. So I will tell you, I think probably more people are praying for you than you know. People notice you and depend on you, and I don't want to make that a pressure, but I want you to know that they, more often than you know, they turn to the Lord and say, give him strength, help him through this, take him on this long journey of learning his skills. Thanks for listening today, and God bless you as you serve the people that God gave you to serve. Thanks. And now will you teach me to hip hop?
Yes, now's the time.
It's a brand new chapter in my life. I know it is. I feel it.
So do this. Stand up with him and roll it and just do one move. I'm not talking about a big move, but what would a hip hop move look like?
Okay, so how I would move with them?
No, I don't think this is not.
It's like this. It's
But
like
wait
this.
a second. But wait a second.
Yeah, just like that.
We need to back up a little bit.
Who's shouting? We're unhealed kids, that's why we're all pouting. Only difference is we're grown now. We got a spouse, we got some kids, we got a home now. They could be judging you, or it could be all pretend, but when we don't heal from our past, we project it onto them.
Oh,
Bam! That's it right there. And then you go like this. I love it. When we done.
so well done. Put that on. Put that on rather than me. Put that on.
We're all depressed. Our minds are dark. We're lost in it. Our thoughts are nuts. That's why we keep them trapped inside our consciousness. The problem is we're scared to be an honest friend. We're on the fence. Are they really judging me? It all depends. Think back to the first time you felt trauma. Go ponder. Realest thought you'll have is up in your shower. Bro, how did the world we live become so sour? Who's shouting? We're unhealed kids. That's why we're all pouting. Only difference is we're grown now. We got a spouse. We got some kids. We got a home now. They could be judging you, or it could be all pretend, but when we don't heal from our past, we project it onto them. Hear me, friend. I paint these vivid pictures with these lyrics just so you can hear them. Really hope you have an ear to bend. Search your heart. Don't give that thing to no one. If they barely know themselves, how you think that's gonna hold up? You deserve the best. We're all just trying to find our way. We coax the algorithm, skip the comments, likes unless you save. Please don't be afraid to ask for guidance and some help. This letter's not for everyone. It's written for my younger self. Mental health.
Yeah.